welcome to today's video. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at this BBC Model B. Comes complete with this rather nice dust sheet, which is quite cool. And it appears to have, and I know this because I've tried this one before, it does actually work, this machine. It does seem to have a word-wise sideways ROM in there. It's one of the earlier units because it's got this BBC Microcomputer font. It's got the scratchier finish and also no centerpiece there, which means the case does that, which I'll be honest with you is not a problem, but it's something that they actually corrected on the later machines. I think like all Model Bs it has the moulded plug, which is quite cool. Means that they were ahead of their game when it came to safety. And what we're going to be doing with this one today, oh, and also it's still got this, so where a ROM socket would be here, it looks like this has actually been unpunched in, so I'm actually going to leave that because you don't see them that often with that not actually punched through. Because a lot of these are ex-school machines, you would sort of tend to find a lot of them with that just punched through. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking a look at the power supply in this, and we're going to be taking a look at trying to recap the supply. First thing we need to do is to obviously get the cover off, and I've had a look at this earlier. It's got two cross heads on the back and there'll be another two screws underneath the unit. So don't need the super fancy set of screwdrivers. This small kit should actually suffice for today's work. Don't need anything super fancy. This is a conveniently located flat head. So there we go, let's bring this one up. So I think this is one of the later switch mode supplies. So it's not a super early machine, it is an earlier machine, but it's not super early. So there's one. Incidentally, the screws are actually marked with fix, so you know exactly which one you need to remove in order to get the back off. Econet and that reset switch section do appear to have been punched out. Econet isn't fitted, and neither is the reset switch. So if we flip it over, it looks like we've actually got the original crosshead screws in for those two. Not quite sure why those back ones were the flathead screws. I assume that somebody's had this apart in the past. In fact, somebody's definitely had it apart in the past because they've had to fit the ROM chips for word-wise, or the sideways ROM chip. So, very easy to remove. Actually looks like somebody's been in here as well. The two separate screws there and there. But to be honest with you, that is really common with Beebs. They don't always tend to have the same screws, especially when they get to this sort of age. The majority of them have been in the hands of schools, because they're relatively simple to fix. School IT departments have obviously taken it upon themselves to fix them whenever they've gone wrong. And if a screw gets lost, it's replaced with the next most suitable thing. Which is fair enough. It still means that the cover is attached. So, let's carefully flip her over. And if we lift off, there we go, there's the power supply. And you can also see the treatment there for the speaker. Not sure if that is, I got a feeling that somebody's actually done that. You don't normally find them. You usually find the speaker just full of dust, usually. So it's quite unusual to have that in place. Actually, the speaker looks like it's been moved. It's normally about there, if I recall. That actually puts the speaker right under the ROM socket area. In fact, you can see there, that's the ROM socket. That speaker is actually right over the ROM socket. So the speaker should actually live about there. However, it hasn't harmed the machine with it in that position. so it can stay where it is. Acorn motherboard revisions are done in issue number sequence. So you have this number 2030000 followed by an issue number. I'm not sure if I can't remember if that number changes during production, but the issue number certainly does. This is an issue 4 board, which means it's early but not super early. This is obviously the power supply, and we have attached to the motherboard, coming out of the supply, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cables. One of them is a purple cable, which we need to remember because that's obviously different to the rest. We don't need to do anything like removing the keyboard, so that can stay in place, and it's those 2 screws underneath, a couple of these little nuts which hold the keyboard in place. There is an interesting looking ROM there though, which is quite large. I'm not sure what that is. Ah, yes, I know what that is. That might be the spell check ROM. In fact, all the sideways ROMs are fully populated, so there's actually no room in this machine for expansion. If I wanted to expand, I'd need to get the separate daughter board, which I think plugs into the processor slot, then sits around sort of here in the machine. You sort of glue it into the lid, and the 6502 goes onto that board, and then you've got a whole load of additional sideways ROM slots that you can address. It's quite cool, really. So let's have a look at this. First thing that you want to do is to get a photo of exactly where all of these items are. So the last thing you want is to have a situation where you're unplugging the machine and you don't know where the cables go. And also focus on the orientation of the red and the black. It's very, very important. There we go, so those are taken. Those will be useful later. And all we need to do is, quite literally, pull them off. You will see actually on the negative line, it's 0 volt is marked. And certainly on this one, on the positive line, you've got a plus symbol next to it. Negative line, you don't. Yeah, you got a little 0 volts. You've got a little. Can't see the plus symbol on that one, but you can sort of tell. And those two come off quite easily. 0 volt marked as well, which is quite good. And then you've got minus 5 volts, which is the purple one, so that's a negative 5 volt line. Now for the power supply. So we've got these off, and they can just sit out of the way. And to get to the power supply, we have 3 screws on the underside. So I'm going to very gently put the machine down like so. I'm going to remove these 3 screws. So let's start off. There we have. Might need actually to use a slightly smaller bit than that one. Something else I'm minded to do actually as well is to take everything out of the case at some point and put the case out into some bright sunlight. So the bright sunlight should hopefully bleach the case a little bit and remove some of the browning that you sort of tend to get at this sort of age. You can also retro bright them, which is some, I've forgotten how it's done, it's peroxide or something. But the natural approach with sunlight actually seems to work rather well also. So that's the 3 screws holding in the power supply. Put those to one side. And actually having cross-headed screws on the bottom and flat screws on the top is actually quite handy, so you know exactly where the screws are going to go back. So the power supply should be loose at this point. So hold the power supply in like so. And once they're in a suitable position, I should be able to just hopefully tease out the supply like that. That's the floppy connector, and we can actually have a good look at this one to see if anything has been changed. So it's these RIFAs here that normally cause us issues, as they tend to release all of their magic smoke. And that one looks intact, but you can never tell with these things, so it's always best to replace them. So that is out of the way, and to keep things safe, I'm just going to put the cover back on just to keep the rest of the machine in an undamaged state. So that will go on quite nicely. There we go. We can move the machine out of the way, put it safely on a shelf, and we can have focus on the PSU. Now, this has not actually been turned on for a couple of months now, so I'm hoping that all of the capacitors would have discharged. If you are attempting this work pretty much as soon as you've turned it off after using the machine, make sure that the capacitors are discharged using the normal methods. What I tend to do is connect a pair of crocodile clips to each capacitor and then run them through a source of resistance such as a light bulb, or in this case it would be quite a small light bulb, but something that will provide an amount of resistance to allow them to discharge, I suppose naturally or sort of slowly would probably be a good analogy to use. And in that way you're not going to, hopefully not going to cause any damage. So we need to get the main board out of the power supply. And you've got this little earth screw here. You've got two earthing connectors on. Make sure that those go back in place. So you've got machine side there, and you've got flex side there. So I'm actually going to see if I need to use a pair of pliers with this. It would not surprise me if I do, actually, because they are usually in quite tight for obvious reasons. So I'll just substitute the bit and get a pair of pliers onto the back of that, like so. There we go. And we can then come in here and I'll do it this side actually. So I'll get that off and I'll be back shortly. So something useful to remember when removing this, you've got the two little spade connectors. You also have one of those lock-in washers. So it's like a serrated edge washer which sits behind those two little connectors. It sits on the screw. So we'll need to recover that like so, which is easier said than done. There we go. Pop the screw out. Then we just need to make sure that we have that little complete set there. And just place it out of the way, safekeeping with the other screws. What we also have holding everything else in is we have a screw here, here, and whoops, here. So let's get those out. So we'll start with this one. Actually, I'll just see if I've got a slightly longer screwdriver, which I should have in my collection of screwdrivers. There it is. There we go. And that is too thin on the head, so bear with me whilst I grab an appropriate screwdriver. Another thing to bear in mind when removing those screws is you do have a little washer on each one. So make sure that you keep the washer safe with the screw and that you replace like for like when you come to put the supply back together. It's also a good idea to keep the wiring out of the way as far as possible. It just makes generally removing everything that little bit easier. Now, what you can also do to help out is using that pair of pliers that we had earlier. You can use that to swoop in and gently remove the screw. Then a pair of tweezers I really need new tweezers actually, to grab out the washer. So I'm going to get the remainder of the screws out and you'll rejoin me once I've got the board out of the chassis. Now there will be a little bit of deck clearing, and one of those items is the main power switch. So it takes a little bit of manipulation to get it out, which involves pressing down these plastic tabs to flatten them completely and then pushing from behind to get the switch out. Now you'll notice that half of the switch is connected to the main supply and the bottom two connectors are connected to the main board itself. So what we will do is we will gently tease off the spade connectors for these two, and then we can focus on the floppy drive auxiliary power output connector here, usually use floppy drives, shortly. So I'm going to get those two off and then we'll focus on this side. There is also a little cable tie that threads through here. You need to chop that off as well. Only a little tiny one, that sort of size there. So just remember to have a stock of cable ties when you come to reassemble. Right, let's get that sorted out. So the board is actually nearly ready to remove, and I've just noticed that on the rear we've got another earth connector which we just need to get off as well. So let's see if the screwdriver is adequate for that purpose. Nope. Let's see if this one is. Yep, that one's more than adequate. Actually, that's interesting. There is a date on this of 8506. I wonder if this supply is actually from 1985, which means it could be a replacement supply, possibly. So I thought issue 4s were earlier than 85, unless 85 being the 4th year of production would mean, yeah, I guess that would mean an issue 4 board, possibly. So this comes out, or should come out, like so. Don't forget, on the back of that little earth connector again, between metal frame and the spade earth connector itself, you got another lock-in washer. So make sure that you keep that together with your other screws. You also have a cable tie holding this to the body, so make sure you've got a selection of cable ties ready to go when you come to reassemble. So this should theoretically come through like so. That earth there should move out of the way like that, so we don't need to move the flex. That should come out, and the board should come out like so, leaving just the body, the switch and the flex, which we can pop out of the way for safekeeping. Now this means that we can focus on these capacitors, and it's these two little RIFAs that I'm interested in initially. So we have this one here, which is a 0.01 microfarad RIFA, and we've got this one here which is a 0.1 microfarad. Now, I'm going to have a look through my collection of capacitors to see if I've got something suitable by means of replacement. It looks like we caught this one just in time. Look at that crack that's appeared across the casing of the actual capacitor. So, let's put that to one side and let's get a suitable replacement installed. So I'm using for the replacement X2 capacitors, which are, as far as I understand, a modern drop-in for RIFAs. So I'm going to pop one of those into here and poke it through. There we go, it's nice and snug. There's our 2 pins. Just make sure that I'm still in focus. Yep, that's better. And we're going to grab a bit of solder onto there. So we got 1 and 2. There we go. Looking good. All we need to do now is just chop off the legs. There we go. And we can move on to the next RIFA, which is this one. And that, oh, look at that, that's interesting. There is a little slot here, which I assume is just would be a switch to switch the supply from 230 volts to 115 volts, which would be suitable for the American market. That's interesting. So that one is actually here. So that's actually got quite a lot of solder on it. So let's go in for the kill on this one. I need to warm up quite a bit of the solder. That should be clear enough. And this side. There we go. Warm it up a bit. And that's interesting. There's actually another hole there, so I assume it's the same circuit. But I do wonder if the additional hole is possibly for a smaller footed capacitor, which means that I could uncover this hole, because the RIFA's replacements, the X2s, have actually got slightly smaller footprint. I could probably poke them through that hole instead of the outer holes. That's handy. So let's see. Yeah, it's probably using these is causing it to crack, but it's really brittle, which is probably why they tend to go to air, so to speak. So let's get in there and grab that out of the way, and you can see there you've actually got the 2 holes in there. If I bring it up closer and a bit of focus, yeah, you can see the 2 holes in there. Right, so let's get a suitably sized RIFA replacement. Sorry, got one there. That should do the trick, I think. So we'll use the inner pair of holes because those seem more appropriate. And there we go, that's in place. So that will want to escape, so what I tend to do is just put the legs over like so, so that it doesn't have a chance to escape. Now with solder, I'm going to do a couple of blobs on here, so I'll have one here to cover that, and another there to cover the exposed hole. There you go. And same story on this side. Actually move that leg like so. So one here to solder it to the board, and spread the solder so it covers the exposed hole. There's our RIFA, and other RIFA, those will go straight in the bin. There's no point in reusing these, especially when they've started to crumble like these ones have. It's just false economy. So, off with the leg, and off with the other leg. And there we go. That's the two RIFAs replaced. Now, what I will also do is give these other capacitors a cursory glance over with the capacitor tester. So that's a 250, 100 microfarad capacitor. So let's see, I know it's on board, so it might not give us the desired result, but let's see what we get when we use the capacitor tester. So we have here, so we've got those two. Apparently it reckons that's 43 picofarads. I'm not really convinced with this tester, to be honest with you. Yeah. And the other one, (102 microfarads). You see, it could be the quality of the solder. Let's try that one again. Yeah, there you go, 102 microfarads. And that one, that's actually working better now. You have to have a good firm push onto it. 102 microfarads. So those big ones are okay. So we've got this small little one here, which is (220 microfarads). Okay. So look at it, try and translate it through to the rear of the device. I think it's this one, is it this one? No, it's not that one. There's plus there, so that one and that one maybe? Which I don't actually know. It's quite difficult to tell. It could be this one. And this one maybe. (273 microfarads). I'm not sure that's the correct pins that I'm trying to test on. That's actually quite difficult to determine because you've got a lot of components around it. So you've got this line here, which is resistors. Then you've got, I think it might be this one and this one actually. So this one and this one. So let's pop those two there. Yeah, it's not those two. Let's have another look. Actually, it could be these two here. So you've got, yeah, it is, because you've got this here, and then you've got this one. So it's going to be these two, I guess. So let's do (209.5 microfarads apparently. So it's a little bit low, but so So it's 220 at 10 volts. Should I replace it or should I leave it? I'm going to leave it because the rest of the supply was working. It hasn't blown the RIFAs, so and I don't really want to trash a working supply. So I'm going to leave that as it is and reassemble that back into its case. There we go, that's the supply back together. So what I'm going to do is power it up outside of the machine and measure the output voltages to make sure that nothing has changed. So I'll just find a suitable plug. There we go. And there we go. There we are, so that's now powered up. There is voltage going through. So it's going to be direct voltage. So here we go. There's no smoke show, which is usually a good sign. So positive to negative. There's definitely something there, it's just my fiddly fingers that need to get the connection properly. Yep, definitely something on that one. So that's plus 5 volts. Check this one. So annoying, these blooming things. These probes are really not easy. Might be easier going in here. So wedge that one in there. Put that in place and into there. And that's not much easier, to be honest. That keeps working its way out. Let's try it this way again. So there. Yep. So we're definitely getting voltage outputs. Let's try this third set. It's 5.1 volts. So I'd be interested to know what the It'd be interesting to find out what the borderline is, or tolerance rather. I would assume it's plus or minus 0.1 volts, which brings it in line with what I'm getting. There we go, so that looks okay actually, so let's turn it off. Let that quietly discharge. Turn it on again, make sure there's no explosions or anything. No strange smells. There we go, I think we can put that back into the BBC. So, let's move this out of the way. Now, to be honest with you, what I will probably do is source, because I don't want to use any old capacitors in this, so I will probably source good quality capacitors to replace all of these other electrolytics. I don't want to just use anything. So the RIFAs were for me the most important because they're the ones that normally seem to go up in a puff of smoke. The other ones, we've measured them, they seem reasonably okay, so I'm happy to leave those at the minute. But what I want to do is to revisit this supply and actually put in the correct size of the correct size of capacitors. So I'm just going to see if I can route the wires in here any better, because they're crushing that capacitor a bit. So what I could probably do is tweezel up one through. There we go. And this is because that new replacement capacitor is a bit taller, so what it's done, it's meant this negative leg is a little bit more stretched, but if you do that, that's actually okay. The positive leg's got plenty of slack on it, and the negative leg should be okay as well. Right, let's get the bead reassembled, and I'll be back with you shortly. So let's just power this up without a VDU a second, to unplug my soldering iron as well. So I'll get that out of the way. Yeah, that sounds normal. Boop beep, which is perfectly normal. Nice beep type sound. It's always good to hear. It means that we have actually done something that hasn't broken something, which is always nice. What we do need to do though is hook this up to a suitable VDU. Now, is my cat atop the red diffusion? Yes, he is. So I'm going to go and take this. No, I'm going to move the cat, get the red diffusion out, and we'll test the beeb on the red diffusion. So let's just move that out of the way, and we'll be back shortly, ready to test out the beeb. To test, got the red diffusion plugged in. Boom! Well, not literally boom, but there you go, she's working well. Not bad at all. Very happy with that. So we have technically a much safer machine that's not going to pop a RIFA any time in the next sort of couple of minutes. What I'll do now is I'm probably going to leave this running. This is the VDU that I demonstrated in the previous video. It has many inputs, which I've discovered, and the text is actually really clear. It's a really good VDU. In my opinion, it produces a better picture than a cub. I will probably be shot for saying that, and there will be many people in the comments going on at how I'm sacrilegious for not hooking my beeb up to a cub. I do have a cub, but it's in my mum's loft, otherwise I would have used that, I promise. But this one, you can't really see it on this camera, but very crisp, very nice text actually. So I'm going to have a bit of a play and see what I can do with this. So I've just entered a very basic, literally in basic, command. So type run, and that's rather cool. You've got a fade in and fade out of a siren, which is quite nice. So I'm rather pleased with how this has come out. We've now got a beeb which is, in my view, safe to work with, because those RIFAs are not going to blow up. If we just do a quick recap of those RIFAs, as you can see, they're really not in the best of shape. They're that one cracked on removal, so that will probably blow apart at some point. This one also began to crack on removal. It's basically this outer resin coating that seems to break down, and then it gets to the actual capacitor inside, which is a metal case, but also that begins to crack as well. And then before you know it, poof, all gone. Anyway, the values, this one's a 0.1 microfarad, this one is a 0.01 microfarad, so worth replacing as I've done like for like. As I said earlier, if I had better set of capacitors, I've only got sort of relatively low quality capacitors in my collection. But if I had better quality capacitors, I would have replaced some of the other electrolytics on the PSU board as well. But touch wood, seems to be okay. Anyway, I'm rather pleased with how this one's come out. Incidentally, this book is rather cool. It's a reprint of a book called BBC Building Blocks for the BBC. Building Blocks for BBC Games. It's by Bruce Bailey. And it's a reprint of an earlier book of the same title. This one... Yeah, there you go. So this one was reprinted in 2020. But it was based on a 1984 edition of the same book. So I'll be having a bit of fun with this at some point, actually manually entering some of the programs into this machine. Although I probably will hook up one of my external floppies. And there we go. So I've got a few plans for this machine. It'll be interesting to see what we're going to be doing with it. Anyway, for the moment, if you have found this video interesting, don't forget to hit the like button, don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, definitely hit the like button, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.